Hey there, stackers and other smart investors. This is Half Dollar coming at you from Silver Doctors. Yesterday, Jerome Powell was asked a question about the gold standard, so let's take a look at the question, his answers, and break it down a little bit. Play by play, if you will. Let's begin.
Chairman Powell, do you think that the U.S. should go back to the gold standard for our currency?
Something's wrong about that question. Oh, yeah, there we go. See, it's gold and silver. You know what I mean? It's not really a choice. It's not just gold. It's not silver. It's not gold or silver. It's gold and silver. But we'll just let that slide for a moment. Just continue.
Let me say I wouldn't, this could feasibly be considered commenting on a particular nominee who has recommended that, and of course I would not do that. I will answer your question, but I want to make sure that this isn't interpreted in that way.
Oh, thank God. I mean, what would we do if we didn't understand the question? I mean, only the Fed chair can make, an answer to such a complex question. Wait, what did she ask again? Do you think that the U.S. should go back to the gold standard for our currency? Yeah, I mean, I tell you, there's just so many different ways that we could interpret that. I don't even know where to begin, so thank God for Jerome Powell.
So, no, I don't think that would be a good idea.
You don't think that would be a good idea? It's not really a choice. It's right there in the United States Constitution. Bam! Make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment. You see, you don't get to decide. It's right there. Gold and silver are our money, as agreed upon, as humans have always agreed upon for 5,000 years. Let's continue.
The idea would be Congress would have to pass a law.
Okay, we'll get back to that later. But that's pretty much what happens when you lay out the foundation in the Constitution that you would pass a law. So, okay, sounds good.
And that law would say that our job with monetary policy is to manage the level of the dollar, stabilize the dollar price of gold.
Stabilize the dollar price of gold. Let's see here. Manage. Wait a second. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution talks about coining money and talks us about fixing the standards of weights and measures. What does that mean? We'll get back to that in a moment. But what it means is that the dollar, right, our money, is nothing more than a specific weight and purity of silver and gold. Let's continue.
And we would then not be looking at maximum employment or stable prices.
Stable prices? Stable prices, that's one of their two objectives. Let's look how stable their prices have been from the Fed's own chart. We can see it down there from the St. Louis Fed. From Fred, that's from the St. Louis Federal Reserve System, and this chart is on the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar since 1913. That's when the Fed came into existence. What has happened to their price stability since 1913? Well, the dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power. Does that sound like that the Fed has been able to successfully complete their objectives? I don't think so. Let's continue.
There have been plenty of times in the fairly recent history where the price of gold has sent signals that would be quite negative for either of those goals. So,
the price of gold has sent signals that would be negative. Well, you see, the price of gold doesn't send anything, right? Because all gold is our money, silver too. Gold and silver are the measure. More on that later. Let's continue.
I don't think that's something that would be attractive. No other country uses it.
Because it's much more volatile. Linking it to gold would be very volatile.
Okay. We excused her ignorance when it comes to silver, right? I mean, she's an elected member of Congress. You'd think she would understand what the Constitution was. But can we really let her ignorance of monetary history just slide? I mean, we're talking about the House Financial Services Committee. What in the world is this person doing serving on a financial services committee when she doesn't even understand monetary history, the history of money in the United States, price stability, or gold? Moving on.
It's really that it's not connected to our direct. You've assigned us the job of.
You get that nervous that much there, Jerome Powell? Looking pretty nervous to me. Just the Jerome Powell shuffle.
Of two direct real economy objectives: maximum employment, stable prices. If you assign to stabilize the dollar price of gold, monetary policy could do that.
Okay, now we're back to the what's the stable price of gold? Well, we see here monetary policy could do that. We went back to that whole Congress would have to pass the law, and they did. Guess what? It's called, boom, the Coinage Act of 1792. Links to these sources will be in the video description below. Let's look at the Coinage Act of 1792, and let's talk about assigning the specific monetary value to gold and silver. You see, Eagles, what a cool name, right? Eagles was our $10 coin, and that consisted of 247 grains and 4/8 of a grain of pure, or 270 grains of standard gold. Dollars, right, as in $1, dollars, or the same as now current, and to contain 371 grains and 4/16 parts of a grain of pure, or 416 grains of standard silver. Well, what does that mean? That's a specific weight, right? A grain, right? Not a gram, but a grain. That's a weight. And pure, you're talking about 999. Standard, you're talking about 90%. Oh, look at that, 90% silver. There we go. So, it's not really stabilizing anything, right? Because the bottom line is it's a measure, right? More on that in a second. Let's continue.
But the other things would fluctuate, and we wouldn't care. We wouldn't care if unemployment went up or down. That wouldn't be our job anymore. So I think that would be difficult.
And that's not a positive mission for the Fed. You're much better mission for the Fed is what you're doing right now.
Okay. Back to this whole measure things. We wouldn't care. Things would swing. That's right. You don't care. You wouldn't care. And you shouldn't care because gold is the measure, right? You don't manipulate gold up or down or one way or another. Gold is the measure. Check out what I got here. This is a ruler. A ruler is a measure. It's got inches on it. It's got centimeters. I don't know, those crazy Europeans with their metric system. But you can see it's got inches, it's got centimeters, it's got half inches. That's called a measure, right? You measure other things against this. Maybe you have a piece of wood that you need to cut, and you need to measure that piece of wood. Maybe you have, a gold nugget that you need to measure, right? You can measure that on a ruler. The ruler is the measure. 12 inches is always 1 foot, right? It's a reliable measure. That's what it is. Let's move on.
This is why every country in the world abandoned the gold standard some decades ago.
This is why every abandoned some decades ago. Let's see here. When you're talking about abandoning the gold standard some decades ago, you're talking about several events over the last 100 years, right? That began in 1913 with, in my opinion, the unconstitutional creation, bastardization of the Federal Reserve System. But if you want to get specific, we can talk about 1933. If you want to get specific, we can talk about the end of World War II. If you want to get specific, we can talk about 1964. If you want to get specific, we can talk about 1971. There are lots of dates, right? So just to say some decades ago, talk about belittling gold, which is his primary job, in addition to manipulating price, suppressing it down. Let's continue.
Okay. Well, and that's that reluctance or that desire not to go back to the gold standard is something that you have in common with the CEOs of the seven of the world's globally systemic important banks who are
7 systemic, globally important banks. Is not even the term, Mrs. House Financial Services Committee representative. And if 7 of the most systemically important global whatever she said don't want to go back to a gold standard, there's a reason for that, because debt-based fiat currency is their product, and working in conjunction with the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the Federal Reserve, and their agents acting on their behalf to suppress the prices of gold and silver, they can make massive profits at the expense of their fraudulent, unconstitutional price suppression of what is constitutionally required to be our money, gold and silver. So when you ask a question about should we go back to the gold standard, well, it's the gold and silver standard, and it's not a choice. Thanks for tuning in.
I directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
Sure you did.